Again, welcome to today's training. This is Until Help Arrives. I want to give you just a little bit of background about this course. After the Boston Marathons, the bombing, the Medical Reserve Corps was approached to assist in the development of a course which would train volunteers to help in the event of an emergency when first responders would be overwhelmed or it would take some time for them to respond. This was intended to give citizens tools to help those around them until additional help could arrive. The course was initially called Becoming an Active Bystander. In the summer of 2014, several Medical Reserve Corps units around the country were asked to pilot test this curriculum and to provide feedback for improvements. The Southwest Virginia Medical Reserve Corps was one of those units. We were pleased to be asked to teach this class and to host the CDC advisors. So after several years of continued improvement and development from ASPR and FEMA and CDC, the course name was changed to Until Help Arrives, and was finalized into what we're going to be today. With you a little bit of warning, there may be some graphic images and audio clips that you'll see during the course of this presentation. I just wanted to make you aware of that. Not a lot, but there are some things that may um, the intent of this course is to give you some training and some knowledge and skills to keep people alive with life-threatening injuries until the professional help can be on the scene. And one of the things that we'll keep coming back to is life-threatening injuries. There are several different modules that we'll be covering today. Like I said, at the end of every module, we'll try to stop and answer any questions that you may have. First of today's training, you will learn about the critical role you play in the emergency medical response system when you act to be the help arrives. We're going to examine why some people act and why others don't, and explore how the stress of life-threatening situation may affect their mind and bodies. So the purpose of this topic is to set the stage for the entire course, give you some basic understanding of your role, and the framework for discussing each of the topics that we're going to cover today. So trauma is the leading cause of death in Americans under age 46. To stop someone from dying. While the nation's emergency medical responders are quick to arrive, any delay between injury and the initiation of care can result in death. Those nearest to someone with life-threatening injuries are best positioned to provide the first care, which should focus on the most essential actions, including moving someone away from a danger, stopping life-threatening breathing, positioning the injured so they can breathe, keeping them warm, and providing comfort care. This course looks to educate you about the important role you would play in providing these life-saving interventions prior to the arrival of EMS. So one of the things that's very important to understand is when something happens, when there's an event that multiple people witness, a lot of people assume that someone else will step up. And I know that we've all been in those situations where you don't necessarily want to be the first person to step up. But typically, once the first person does step up, that will trigger others in the vicinity to also step up as well. And so that's why it's really important that we realize that we need to be the first person to act. And to be the first person to act so many times is that you've got the skill sets and the training to know how to handle the situation. So we're going to go to our first video and we'll hope that this works. So let's make sure we can get this done. So we're stopping sharing. All right.
and decide. It was a little strange to sit down to someone that you've never met before and decide that you're going to grab their hand and tell them everything is okay.
I screamed. That's all I remember doing at that moment. I knew I was going to wreck.
I remember feeling like we had to do something immediately right now.
The day started out like any other day. Wasn't cold, wasn't hot. My friend called me that morning and he said, I'm going to take out my Harley and you got your new bike. And so let's just go out and have some fun.
All of a sudden, I see the woman on the motorcycle just flying through the air. I just remember saying, stop the car. My husband's cousin took his shirt off and immediately started applying pressure to stop the bleeding.
Keneal was holding my hand. I remember that distinctly. She was saying, you're going to be okay. And to hear those words were so important.
I really feel bystanders have a responsibility to act. Don't be afraid. You're not going to hurt yourself. You're not going to hurt the patient. All you'll do is help, even if it's just a comforting hand.
Doing something is better than doing nothing. That helps us more than they would ever realize. That can make all the difference between life and death.
If you imagine yourself in a situation where you've been in an accident, you're vulnerable, you're frightened, think about what you would want.
That work? Adrenia, did I do it right?
Yes.
Yay! Okay. Okay, we've got to stop that one.
We're going to be talking.
Okay, now share content. Here we go. All right. So when you come upon a series, there's several different kind of incidences that we may come on. And yes, I'll turn up the volume on the next video. Thank you. There are several life-threatening injuries that can happen in different situations. The most common one that we probably all have an understanding of is vehicle crashes, and how devastating they can be. Sometimes home-related injuries, pedestrian injuries. Those are the kind of things that typically you would know and understand. Then you have those rare incidences where they're man-made events or local weather incidences like tornadoes, active shooters, multi-vehicle crashes, railroad derailments. Those are rare. And then the very rare are those large-scale disasters, acts of terrorism like the Boston Marathon, like the train bombing in Spain, transportation issues, collapsing bridges, those kind of things. Those are the type of incidences that could cause the life-threatening injuries that we're talking about. So what we want you to know is that you can make a difference. Each of the simple steps listed on this slide are things that you can do to help. We'll spend more time on each one as we go through the training today. But when you come across incidents involving multiple injured people, look around for other uninjured people like yourself who can help you divide the work responsibility and help as many of the injured as you can. So if you see folks around you that appear to not be injured, appear to just sort of be in shock, as the first person that is stepping forward to help, involve them in the help as well. It's important to get them, give them something to do and get them helping you with those that are in need of care around you. So EMS response, sometimes, according to the National EMS Information System, and on average, it'll take 6 to 9 minutes for EMS to arrive. That's probably in more urban areas. I live in a more rural area. It could take up to 20 to 25 minutes. Many of the EMS providers in my area are volunteer. So that also impacts their time that they can respond. So when you're involved in something, know that EMS isn't going to be there in a split second. And so you may need to step up and be helping someone with a life-threatening injury while you're waiting for EMS to arrive. That is certainly, that was the situation with the Boston Marathon bombing. Even though EMS was there, they were at the end of the road course in the first aid tents, and then the bombings happened, and there was so much debris between them and the end of the road race that it took a while to get them actually to them. So that's one of the things that's just real important to understand, is that there may be some time there before folks are actually able to get to you. So now we're going to go to the next video. Okay. Show.
Do you need me to show it, Christina? You good?
Are you not seeing that, Adrenia?
No, we do not see it.
Okay, hang on. Share computer audio. You see it now?
Yes, we see it.
Any first responder
Yep.
will tell you that it is rare, really rare, to show up on any scene, whether it's a fire, whether it's, someone sick, whether it's, a cat in a tree, where someone isn't trying to do something. We do a pretty good job as professional medical response. We do a good job getting there quickly, but when we get there and nothing's been done, when we get there and there's been a huge time lag, when you get there and it's been 30 minutes, and the person's now cold, and we know getting hypothermic, getting cold when you're traumatically injured kills you. We know that. The person is in a position where they can't breathe well, right? And they haven't been getting enough oxygen. That kills you. We know that. 30 minutes is a long time. The person who's bleeding and they continue to bleed and there's a giant puddle of blood on the ground which should be inside that person's body. We know that. So can we keep them alive? Maybe. But it's going to be way harder if we don't have that citizen helping us out. It's a team. We're a team. We're here to help you. We need you to help us.
People are afraid because they don't have formal training that they might make the situation worse. Really, it's very, very hard to make the situation worse. If you're in a situation where someone's suffering some kind of life-threatening emergency, it's pretty hard to make it worse for them than it already is. It's much better to try to do something. You're very unlikely to cause them harm. So it's better to, at least give it a shot. It's a difference between life and death for that person, because we are quick, but we're not that quick.
If people knew that they could intervene and do something immediately, would help enormous numbers of people. The worst thing you can do is just stand by and do nothing.
In 2013, the CDC conducted research to better understand what motivates people to help others during an incident. When are they most likely to help, and what inhibits their actions? Based on a series of interviews with professional responders, survivors, and witnesses from various incidences around the world, the CDC found that people are more likely to help when the emergency is unexpected, sudden, and clearly recognized as an emergency. They believe they can help by doing something the survivors cannot do alone. They perceive an immediate threat to themselves or someone near them. The threat of danger appears to be getting worse, or they empathize with the injured person. Maybe they were sitting beside them on the train. The CDC also found that there are reasons people hesitate to act. And so that's why we have this course today to help you get over any fears and inhibitions that you might have. Their assumption and expectation is that uniformed medical responders will arrive on the scene very quickly and take appropriate action. And we've seen just in that last video that there is going to be some time before emergency responders get there. They don't know what to do, and they fear they will cause greater injury to the person who needs help, and they fear they'll cause harm to themselves by helping others, in case there's a risk of more gunfire, additional bombing, getting into the fire. So every situation, the choice to act or not is personal, and there's no right or wrong choice. The goal of this course today is to provide you with some basic information and some skills so that should you find yourself in a situation where someone with a life-threatening injury needs help, you'll know how to act appropriately. Now, there are some things that you need to know about what stress does to you. And this is going to be a highly stressful situation for you. So before you step forward, recognize that the stress may have an impact on you. In any life-threatening situation, you will feel fear, and this fear will impact your mind and your body and your decision making. It's important for you to be aware of what may happen so you can recognize the responses as a normal part of your body's response to stress. It's normal to experience certain physical and psychological changes, such as those on this slide. So recognize that fear is typically at its peak once you understand the danger of the situation. Fear has profound effects on your mind and your body, and fear can influence your actions. We've all heard of fight or flight. For most people, a life-threatening situation is not a normal part of life. When your brain is presented with novel situations, it goes through a process of trying to evaluate how much danger you're in and then deciding what to do. In this process of assessment, the first step is rationalization or denial. Did I just hear or see what I thought I heard or saw or heard? For example, survivors of active shooter incidences often report thinking the initial gunfires were fireworks. The brain is programmed to find an anchor for a novel situation by searching your previous experiences, such as fireworks, which you may recognize, compared to gunshots, which may be a new sound for you. The anchor may allow the brain to determine how risky the new situation is and how to act appropriately. When the brain gets stuck in the process of searching for an anchor, people freeze, the fight or flight, while the brain flips through its memory archives. Once the brain has determined what's happening, it deliberates on how to act, and then it acts. So it's important to recognize that while your brain is moving through this assessment process, you may also physically experience things like tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, or other distortions of the senses. The body is programmed to focus its energy on what's determined to be the most important sense needed in the moment. Similarly, a surge of adrenaline will flood your body that may give you unusual strength or speed. We've seen mothers picking cars up off of children. But the after effects of this may include nausea or vomiting, being suddenly hot or cold, and feeling very shaky once that adrenaline decreases. These are all normal physical responses that can happen when you're faced with a life-threatening situation. So in an emergency, your brain will search for those previous experiences for that anchor that tells it how to respond. So training, including mentally rehearsing how you would react, provides a hook for the brain and speeds your assessment process and therefore speeds up your action. Professional first responders train regularly to make their reactions to emergencies second nature, muscle memory. They often report doing their jobs without even thinking about it. And probably many of us have things that we do in our job that you don't even think about it. It's just rote. Your participation in this course is part of your training and will help you to act more decisively during an emergency. Beyond this course, there are many other trainings that can help you develop your skills, and we'll talk about those in the end. So we're at the end of this. Do we have any questions, Adrenia?
No, we do not. Not as of
Okay.
yet.
And we'll go on to topic 2, which is calling 911. And what we want to make sure we have here is that you answer the questions asked by the 911 operator when you find yourself responding and helping people with life-threatening injuries, and how to work with the operator during the call. I know you've probably all had experience with 911, but there are some really important things that you need to be able to do. If we mentioned, if you have someone around you that is not injured, maybe they can be the one that calls 911 for you if you feel like you can provide some care immediately to someone. So if there's someone close by, give them a job, have them call 911. One of the nice things about all of our smartphones now is we typically can call 911 and then put it on speakerphone so that we can hear the operator on the other end, particularly if they are giving us any kind of reaction steps to have to take. So before the emergency responders arrive, because you've called 911, you are their eyes and ears. Because they have specialized equipment and training for different types of emergencies, the more specific information you can give, the faster they can get the right equipment and the right people to the scene. Take a deep breath. Give the operator as much information as you can right off the bat, and then they're going to start asking you questions. They may ask you questions to find out if you can provide care to someone. They may be asking you questions about the situation because they're feeding the information that you're giving them to the first responders that are on the way to you. If they are asking you a lot of questions, don't take that as they're delaying the response of the first responders while they're getting all the information for you. They've already got responders coming, but they're trying to continue to get as much information as they can. So please be patient and answer all of the questions that they are asking you while they have you on the phone. Be ready to share the most important information that you can. Location of the situation, as much specific information as you can give. The floor, the room number. If you're on the interstate, what's the mile marker that you're closest to? How should the first responders get to you? How can they reach the site, particularly if there's now debris on roadways? What's the nature of the life-threatening situation? Tell them what you're seeing, what you're dealing with. A brief description of what happened. You don't have to get in the weeds and get into the details, but very briefly tell them what you assume has happened. The number of people involved that you can see around you. Any obvious hazards to responders that are going to be making their way in. Is there a fire that is now erupted? Is there water flowing? Do you see other bomb materials, other things that could have a bomb in them? And then always give them your name, your phone number, your address, any kind of information, because they may need to reach out to you later on. If you're on the interstate, like I said, mile markers, the closest exit that you're at, the name on the exit. Are you going northbound, southbound, eastbound, westbound? Give them as much specific information about the location as you can. What is involved in the incident? How many vehicles? Are people awake? Are they in pain? Are they breathing? Are you seeing amputated limbs? What is the extent of the injuries? And then any potential hazards that you may see as well. So again, I know we've all had experience with 911, but it may be just reporting a simple car wreck on the interstate. But if we're talking about something a little bit more serious, we need to give as much information to them as you possibly can so they can get the right tools and equipment and people to you as quickly as possible. Any questions, Adrenia?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, great. So the next thing we need to make sure is we need to make sure that you can stay safe while you're helping those around you, and how you can keep those that you are helping safe while you're waiting for first responders to arrive. And that's a key. We don't want the helpers to get into any kind of danger themselves. So the best thing for you to do is assess what the situation is and use your senses, use your eyes, use your ears, and use your nose. What do you see? Do you see smoke, debris? Do you see vehicles? Do you see people running? What are you visually seeing right there in your vicinity? And then what are you hearing? Or maybe it's what you're not hearing. Maybe it's totally quiet. But are you hearing hissing? Are you hearing gunshots, which you assumed had first were fireworks? And then what do you smell? What's the smells around you, so that you can determine. That's also information that you will give to 911, but that helps you to sort of assess the situation, and figure out what's your next best step. So you're involved in this event. You see people injured around you, but first and foremost, do you feel safe at the spot that you're in? If you do feel safe, you feel like whatever's happened has happened and now we've got to recover from it, then start providing care to those around you that may be injured. But if you're at your spot and you do not feel safe, then you need to say, can I move those that are injured out of this area? If you cannot, then you need to move to a safer location. But if you can move those that are injured out of that area into a more safe location, then you'll need to take the steps to move that injured person out of additional harm's way. So this is the time for you to make that assessment. Now, while there's no one right way to move someone that is injured, there are ways to drag and move as smart as you possibly can, to carry someone effectively, especially when you're alone. Look for people or objects around you that can help. If there's someone standing there does not appear to be injured and is not helping others, get them involved in you helping to move those injured into a more safe environment. You can get them underneath their arms, put their arms sort of across their chest, and drag them walking backwards to get them out of harm's way. If you've got chairs there, put them in a chair, have one person on one side of the chair and one person on another. Use things around you. Is there blankets? Are there beach towels? If something happens at the beach, are there beach buggy wagons that you could put someone in and literally pull them away? So look and see what's around you. Again, that's using those senses to help you move those that are injured out of the situation into an area that is a little bit more safe for them. So you want to use your senses to figure out the situational awareness, so that you can move the injured away, you can keep yourself away, and you can use your best judgment until the professional help gets there on the scene to help you. So next we want to talk about stopping the bleeding. And again, we're talking about these life-threatening injuries, life-threatening bleeding, and the physical impact from a severe loss of blood. We're gonna talk about some effective bleeding control measures, including firm, steady pressure, and the potential use of a tourniquet if you need to potentially use a tourniquet for some of these injuries. So first thing is you want to stop the clock of the bleeding. Every minute with uncontrolled bleeding decreases this person's chance of survival. So time is of the essence, and every minute is taking a minute away from them. So when you walk up and you think that's a lot of blood, look at the situation to determine, is it spurting? Is it steady bleeding? Is the blood pooling? Is the blood soaking through clothes that are lying on top of it? Is it soaking through bandages that have already been put on it? Is there a potential amputation? Is the person pale, shaky, confused, not really aware of their surroundings? Then that's the situation that you find that this may be a life-threatening bleeding situation. So we want to have, now we're going to go to a video to talk about what you can do when we've got these life-threatening bleeding situations.
If you see somebody and you're like, wow, that's a lot of blood, or wow, that's a lot of bleeding, you should do something. That's significant bleeding. What happens is it's all about the amount of blood loss. We have a set amount of blood in our bodies, based on your size and other things. Generally 5 liters, 5 to 6 liters of blood. We know from medical science and studies at what point your body starts to have not enough, blood, to the point where it's causing physiologic problems, it's causing problems. That starts around 500 cc, about half a liter to a liter of blood. Once we get below, if you've lost 2 liters of blood, in 3 to 5 minutes is pretty fast to lose that amount. It's more like probably 10 to 15 minutes in bad bleeds. But once you get to that point, and then beyond that, potentially, you can go into a state of what we call irreversible shock. And essentially, the tank doesn't have enough gas in it to keep the engine running. Irreversible shock is irreversible, which means it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how good your trauma center is. It doesn't matter how good your doctors are. It doesn't matter how good your paramedics are. It doesn't matter. Once you start that physiologic process of irreversible shock, it continues. We can't break that cycle, and you will die, or the person will die. The only treatment for irreversible shock is prevention of irreversible shock. Don't let them get to that point. That blood belongs in the body. It doesn't belong on the street in the body. So let's keep it there. No matter how we do it, let's keep it there.
And I'm going to go straight to the next video.
Pressure stops bleeding. It's one of those things in medicine that we've known for a long time. It's one of the things that it's a truth in medicine that's true today, and it'll be true in 100 years. Pressure stops bleeding. So what we really want the citizen to do, how do you stop bleeding if you're on the side of the road or in the middle of the woods and waiting for someone to come help you, is you have to put pressure on the bleeding. There's a couple things about that people need to understand. Number one, you got to understand a little bit about the anatomy. The major blood vessels, the ones that will cause bleeding to the point where you're going to die, are always deep under the skin near the bone. So they're always down, and they run right along major bones. That means that you have to apply a lot of pressure. It's not pressure, it is a significant amount of pressure. Number two, it may cause some discomfort, and that's okay. You're not doing any damage, you're not hurting them, you're actually saving them. And number three, you have to hold it for a long time, right? You have to make sure you're holding pressure for long enough that the clotting process starts. How long is that pressure? As long as you can. I mean, it's until we get there, or until you can't hold it anymore. What people have a tendency to do is they want to come up and put a bandage on a bleeding wound. A bandage doesn't stop bleeding. All it does is soak up blood. And again, that blood that it's soaking up into that bandage, it should be in your body. It shouldn't be being soaked into the bandage. We want it to stop. So before you put the bandage on, before you make something look pretty, you want to put pressure on it, and that pressure is what works. If you don't get the bleeding stopped, even if you slow the bleeding, maybe you buy that person enough time until we can get there and completely control the bleeding. And then some bleeding can't be controlled. The wounds are too big, the artery is too large, the vein is too large. That's where we look at tourniquets, right? And even still, if you have a wound that needs a tourniquet, I want to put pressure on it while I'm getting the tourniquet in place. Because if you're free-flowing blood while I'm working on getting my tourniquet, you're dying while I'm getting my tourniquet in place. We want to stop the dying. We stop the dying by stopping bleeding with pressure, and then we apply the tourniquet, which then further controls it. That's the key.
And this is this video we just watched. So, and talking about controlling the bleeding, I think it was really important what he was talking about, that is a deep, deep bleed that is happening, and it's going to take a lot of pressure to actually stem that bleeding. So if you don't have really strong arms and upper body strength, you may need to reach out to someone there close by that can do that to help you control that bleeding and get that hard, firm pressure on that bleeding at the time. Here are some things to keep in mind when you are working through finding the source of the bleeding and getting it controlled. You do want to put some kind of barrier against the blood if at all possible. Obviously, gloves are the best, but if you're out at a big event, I doubt if you necessarily have gloves on you. But is there something that you can use around you? Are there plastic bags? Is there a t-shirt that you can put around you? Is there something that you can use as a barrier between yourself and the blood? Don't use the same gloves or the same barrier or the same plastic bag from one person to another person. We know that that's not the smart thing to do as well. If your barrier becomes blood soaked, replace it. Don't layer more things on top of it, because layering more things on top of it is going to make putting that firm, steady pressure even more difficult. You don't want to have bulky layers between your hands and the source of your wound. That's why a t-shirt that's fairly thin would be a good thing to use instead of something large like a towel. And then correctly applied pressure, as he said, is not going to be comfortable for the person that you're helping. But you've got to hold that pressure on. You've got to keep it on until EMS arrives. And it may be that you're helping someone. It may take 2 or 3 of you, and that as you are getting tired and needing some assistance, someone comes up with their hands and starts putting the pressure to relieve you. But that pressure has to be controlled until EMS arrives on the scene. Now, there are, we're not necessarily teaching how to use tourniquets, and obviously with a virtual training, we can't do that, but tourniquets are effective. I know in my Medical Reserve Corps, we do actually have some tourniquet trainers, so that when we do this training in place, that you can learn how to use a tourniquet, and a tourniquet may be something that you want to put in your first aid kit, but you do need to understand how to use it. Again, as he said, you don't want to let up on the pressure you're holding to try to put that tourniquet on. So if you're holding the pressure, someone else is going to have to put that tourniquet on the arm or the leg to provide the support that you need and to stop that bleeding. We know that they're effective in combat and controlling bleeding in wounded soldiers for their extremities, their arms, and their legs. And they're increasingly used by uniformed responders in civilian emergencies. They're safe and effective when applied appropriately. And there are YouTube videos that you can go to and see how to put on and use a tourniquet. You are more likely to save a life than cause the loss of a limb if you use a tourniquet. So tourniquet is something that you really do need to consider if at all possible. In the case of in case a tourniquet is not readily available, you can try to create one for yourselves. And most everybody knows probably the best thing that you would find close to you that you could use would be a belt. I've seen people also make them out of the strapping that you get from cars with the seat belts, the safety belts. But it needs to be broad, it needs to be flexible, it needs to be extremely strong, because you're going to be pulling on it, twisting it, and tightening it very securely. So when you're talking about life-threatening bleeding, we want to apply firm, steady pressure on the source of the bleeding. And as he said, that source is typically deep, so it's going to take a real effort to do that. If you can't control the bleeding with a manual pressure, consider applying a tourniquet and keep that pressure in place, even if it's causing pain to the individual that's injured, until first responders arrive. And for those of you that have been posting on the chat, I just see that up in the corner about sources for tourniquets. Thank you very much. So are there any questions?
Yes, we have one question. Is a blood pressure cuff pump effective in a pinch? if you don't have any other equipment to use as a tourniquet?
Oh, well, probably on an arm. I don't know that it would necessarily be effective on a leg, even a lower leg, but probably for an arm injury, it might be if you could get it strong enough and keep that pressure in place. It would certainly give you something as a barrier that if you could start the pressure and then you could put your hands around it, would certainly be something that to consider. Yes, because it'd be a great barrier.
Great. That's the only question we have so far.
Okay. And so the next thing we want to talk about is positioning the injured. What we've talked about, life-threatening injuries as it relates to bleeding. But one of the other things that we have to be very conscious of is the person actually breathing. And so we want to make sure that we can help someone that may have a slight injury and determine if they are breathing, having any difficulty breathing, and helping them with that. Bleeding is one thing, but we've got to also have them breathing as well. The best position for a body in which is one in which the chest can fully expand and the airway is not at risk of being obstructed. The best position is one in which the tongue can't flop back into the person's throat and one in which blood or fluid do not end up in the lungs, particularly in the case of someone with a facial trauma. So someone who is awake will probably naturally assume a position that is best for them given their injuries. Despite how it might look to you, let them self-manage their airway and position their own bodies. So if they are conscious and are getting in a position that is most comfortable for them to make sure that they continue to breathe, then let them self-manage that. You don't need to come up and change anything or say, oh, it looks better if you would be in this position. Let them self-manage themselves and their breathing. What you want to be concerned about is if you see someone that is not breathing, but don't force them to lie down or sit up or do anything like that. Let them handle it themselves in the most comfortable position that they could be in. The tripod position is probably the best position to help someone get into, whether they're either sitting or standing. Um, Another reason the tripod is good is that they would be able to bend over in the event that they have any blood or tissue or vomit in their mouth or could potentially choke them. Then they could get rid of that while they're either standing or while they're sitting. But if you can help a conscious person get into one of these positions, either in a sitting position or a standing position, whatever's most comfortable for them, then you're assuring that they're getting their full expansion of their lungs and their rib cage and getting good airflow in and out. Now, one of the things to be extremely concerned about are those that are unconscious. And so what you want to find out is if they're unconscious, you don't see any life-threatening bleeding or injuries like that, then you need to assess, are they breathing? So if that injured person is unconscious and breathing, then we're going to move them into the recovery position until first responders can arrive. And the next slide, we'll talk about the recovery position. And if you have done a Revive Narcan training, you know what that recovery position is like. But if the injured person is not breathing, then the next question you need to ask yourself, do you know CPR? Or is there anyone around who knows CPR? And remember, you've still got 911 on the phone giving you direction as well. If you know CPR, there's someone around that knows CPR, or 911 can walk you through opening their airway and beginning CPR, then do that for those that are unconscious. If you do not know CPR, there's no one there to help you do that, then you just want to move that injured person into the recovery position to potentially open up their airway and keep them safe until first responders arrive. This course is not teaching CPR, and I would highly suggest that everybody does do CPR training because it is a skill set that we all need to have. We saw that on the football field this past season. But this is your assessment for those that are unconscious, that you can't help them get into a position to ensure that they're breathing. So the recovery position, this is for someone that is unconscious and breathing, and you've pulled out of the way, and you've got them stable until first responders can arrive. This is also for someone that is unconscious and is not breathing. You want to get that body on the side. Their bottom arm is reaching outward. Their top arm is sort of positioned underneath their cheek, in sort of this tripod position on the floor. Their head is resting on that upper hand. Get those legs bent just a little bit. Raise that chin up. And you want their mouth pointed downward. That's in case they start, spitting up any vomit or blood or any kind of tissue, that it goes out and they don't aspirate that. So even though the risk is small, there is some possibility that you could hurt someone. You have to, that moving them, particularly someone unconscious, into recovery position could cause some harm to their spine, since you don't see anything visible. So if and when you're moving someone into the recovery position, please have someone support their head and neck when you're rolling them onto their side. And if you're moving them out of harm's way, move them once, get them out of harm's way, but try not to move them again. We just want to keep them safe, but we don't want to cause any additional injury to the spine if we don't move without purpose. So if someone is conscious and breathing, allow them to position themselves or help them to get into a tripod position, either sitting or standing. And certainly don't force someone that's injured to lie down or sit up. Let them self-manage their care and their breathing and their pain until first responders can arrive. If someone is unconscious, move them into the recovery position. Minimize the movement of their head. If someone is conscious and breathing, no obvious injuries, but they can't get up, put them in recovery position until EMS arrives. So are there any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about is how you can provide comfort care to those that may be injured. And we also are going to talk about potentially providing comfort care to children and those with access and functional needs. So if you're with someone that has been involved, you're at an event, those around you have been injured, you've got some folks that are just sort of staring into space, they're breathing okay, they're not bleeding, they're probably going to just need some comfort care. So you want to talk with them very simply. What can you do to help them? What do they need? They may ask you what happened. Give them what happened in very simple terms. Give them your name. Tell them what you know about the situation. Tell them that 911 has been called. Tell them that you hear the sirens. Tell them that you see EMS arriving. You know EMS is on the way. You can tell them what's going to happen next. Anything that you can do to reassure them while you're waiting for those to get and assess them for any kind of injuries. You want to keep them warm. Of course, obviously right now people are over warm, but shock will lead people to be chilled. Offer them your hand to hold just for reassurance. Maintain eye contact with them. Get down on their level. Be patient, understanding, talk in very simple terms. If you have to move on to provide care to someone else, tell them that. Don't just abandon them, but say, I think you're okay. You're breathing. You're not bleeding. I'm going to go over here and look at this child over here. Just let them know what you're doing and give them your name so they can call on you again if they need you. You want to remove any wet clothing that they may have on. If water is spraying around them, remove that wet clothing from them. Place something between an injured person and the ground. Right now, that is extremely important with the heat. If someone is outside, you've got an outside event right now, and something happens, put something, clothing, cardboard, before you put people down on some of this horribly hot asphalt and concrete right now, which could cause yet another bad situation, injury for them. Wrap the person in dry layers of clothes, an emergency blanket, a coat, a beach towel, something like that, and shield them from any kind of wind or anything that may be blowing around in the area. So working with children obviously is going to be very different. You want to be aware of their vulnerabilities for stress and trauma. They are still developing their language skills in addition to developing cognitively and emotionally. And so witnessing a traumatic event or being a survivor may be more challenging for children because they just don't have the words to express how they feel or fully understand what they've seen or heard or witnessed. It may be very upsetting for young children if the event separates them from family or immediate loved ones. So it's important to reunite them with folks that they know, family, teachers, school individuals, their camp counselor, as quickly as you possibly can. Focus on reassuring them that they're safe and you're keeping them safe. Create a barrier between them and the scene and victims so they are not traumatized with seeing that. For young children, sit or crouch at their eye level. Help them talk about their feelings, concerns, questions. Ask their name. Where do they live? What grade are they in? What are their ages? Tell them about you. Listen carefully and answer the questions that they ask. Don't give them more information than they're asking for. And be aware that they may start acting younger than their current age. It just is a coping mechanism for them. And those that have access and functional needs, first and foremost, ask them what you can do to help. Like it is with anyone, asking if someone is self-managing their breathing, what can you do to help them? Ask them what they need. If you see that they have a caregiver or a family member or a service animal, try to get them back together and reunited as soon as you possibly can. If they do have a service animal, assess that service animal for injuries as well and make sure that they get the care that they need because they're an important part of that particular person. Talk to them directly. Use whatever means is necessary to communicate with them. It could be writing, it could be gesturing. Offer to write down information to share with first responders when they arrive, something they could have in their hand and give to someone or that you can give to the first responders. Take the word of the person who claims they have a disability, even if it's not obvious to you. Offer a blind or visually impaired person your arm to help them navigate the surroundings because the surroundings are now going to be quite different than what they came into. And so to keep them safe while they're navigating this, offer your arm. And again, make sure that if there's a service animal or someone with them that you provided the care that that person needs or that animal needs. So you want to keep the injured warm, keep them safe. Ask them for permission to provide help to them if they're conscious. Be respectful of their needs. Make sure that you talk with them in simple ways and in simple terms. It may be that all they want you to do is sit there and hold their hand. If you can do that and there are not other people around you that need it, then that could be the most important thing that you do that day. So we're at the end of these particular segments. Were there any questions, Adrenia?
There was one question. Veronica was asking, are there any upcoming CPR and first aid classes being offered through VDH?
That's a good question for Susie. I don't know. One of the things that I do know is that our Medical Reserve Corps offers CPR classes, and there are other Medical Reserve Corps around the state. You might reach out to your Medical Reserve Corps unit coordinator to find out. You can always check with your local EMS council because they are typically on a regular basis offering CPR classes. Most the hospitals in Southwest Virginia are training centers for American Heart Association and would provide CPR classes. So there are a lot of different ways to find a CPR class. And this sort of goes into our next segment, which is before you go, prepare to help. You can also reach out to your local American Red Cross because they also offer CPR classes, and they may be willing to come in and do CPR at a local health department. Anything else, Adrenia?
That was it. Thank you.
Okay. So lastly, before we go, we've given you some tips and some information that you need to have for life-threatening injuries. But what you also need to do is make sure you're ready for this type of action. So you want to make sure that you have a prepared at home for any kind of typical common accidents that we talked about in the very first unit. You want to keep supplies at home. You want to keep supplies at work. You want to, I hope all of your work offices have a first aid kit. We have first aid kits in all of our state vehicles in the Mount Rogers Health District. You also want to have one at home as well. Sign up for those emergency alerts and warnings, and I think all of us do that. And you want to prepare and you want to practice with your family members at home for any kind of emergency that might come up. In talking about emergency first aid kits, one of the things that I will tell you that we learned the first time we did this class is one of our teachers had a first aid kit, but she had it in a tool. She had it in a tackle box, a fishing tackle box. And so she sent someone to her car to get the first aid kit, and they came back empty handed because they said, all that's in your car is a fishing tackle box. If you make your kit up and put it in something other than a first aid kit box, please put on the kit first aid kit. So if you're sending someone to your car or your house or your office to get it, then it's very plainly got written on it, no matter what it is, a box or a tackle box or a toolbox, that it says that it's a first aid kit. And there are a lot of different ways that this is just some of the information, some of the supplies that you would need to have in your kit. And there's a lot of information online on all the different things that you can get. And you can, start gathering stuff at home to put it all into a first aid kit for you to have. Lastly, we talked about enhancing your skills, CPR, use of an AED, first aid. American Red Cross teaches that. We also know that the American Heart Association has it. So reach out and get that additional training. There are still some community emergency response teams in Virginia, and they are doing regular training on responding to events in their community. That would be an excellent opportunity for some additional training to enhance your skills. And then obviously the Virginia Medical Reserve Corps. Every single medical reserve corps in the state has the ability to offer CPR classes, but we're all doing a lot of different training to prepare our volunteers and community members for any other situation that might come up. So take this opportunity to reach out and take another step, do another bit of training, get that CPR first aid training underneath your belt. That's what we want for you to also do, is take another step after you finish this training and involve yourself with something. I know that I heard, on the radio yesterday about the struggles with volunteer fire departments getting new volunteers. Maybe this is the impetus you need to get started with EMT training, or to be a volunteer fireman, or to be in a CERT team. So use this as a jumping off point. And so what we want, and Adrenia is posting it in the chat, the link to the survey for this training and to the certificate that you can print for yourself. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is, if you have others that you would like to have complete this training, this is online as well as offered. The Medical Reserve Corps offers it in person. They also have an Until Help Arrives video for children. And I think that is an excellent opportunity to get children to start thinking about that sort of thing. So make sure that you go back when you go to the certificate, make sure you go back and find the 2 videos and share those with appropriate folks that also need to have this training as well. So I appreciate your time today. I hope this has been helpful for you.